this morning to the press conference for Stace Nelson for the U.S. Senate, and just want to make sure everyone turns off their cell phones, puts them on silent, and we'll give Stace time to make some remarks. He'll be able to handle some questions from you. And, without further ado, I'll introduce Stace Nelson, our next U.S. Senator.
Well, folks, I'm sorry that I don't have any nice street art for you folks' enjoyment. Our campaign signs are actually hard pressed to man, so we don't have any to spare. Good morning, folks. I'd like to start this off by thanking the wonderful grassroots support across South Dakota, some that have been here today that have literally borne me up and carried me on their wings across South Dakota. When I say grassroots, I don't mean $9 million of East Coast special interest money buying support across South Dakota. I mean South Dakotans that are actually supporting our campaign. Very proud of the fact that what I think David Montgomery reported out, that 98% of our support in South Dakota financially has come from South Dakotans, unlike my opponents. On a lighter note, I would like to thank an unusual endorsement that we got this week. As some of you in the media have maybe noticed or ignored, one of the campaign's former senior advisors and social media staff quit and they endorsed our campaign. So that's almost 2 Senate campaigns now that have endorsed the Nelson run. That's Gordon Howey and this other campaign that lost their campaign manager this week. I'd like to start off today by talking about an issue that is right now in the news. The scandal in the VA is, it's unacceptable. As some of you know, I'm a disabled veteran. I spent a long time in the Marine Corps. I've had my dealings with the VA. Now I have immense respect for the healthcare providers within the VA system. I've received nothing but kindness and great care at their hands. But I have went through the gauntlet of having to deal with the VA administration and the bureaucracy that they put forward that is just a phalanx that is there oftentimes, it seems, to keep veterans from getting help. And the current embarrassment, the current shame that our country is looking at right now with the failings of the VA system is something that it breaks my heart. We just got done recognizing the sacrifice of our many veterans throughout this state and our country on Memorial Day. And to know that veterans died languishing in the VA system for lack of care is unacceptable. And this is one of those many issues that is gone unrecognized or undiscussed on this campaign trail. One of my opponents recently held a press conference and said we should talk about the issues. Amen, brother. Yes, we should. I'm the only candidate that has sought out and attended forums and debates across the state repeatedly. 2 of my major opponents have ran from these debates. Mike Rounds has attended 2 debates, and he's ran away from about 8 to 10 debates and forums or requests across this great state. Folks, that's disgraceful. It's unacceptable. Mike Rounds has spent more time running to D.C. to get bags of cash from special interest lobbyists than he has in discussing the issues with South Dakotans. Our country is $17 trillion in debt because of these bought and paid for politicians that are more interested in their own political futures than doing the right thing for America. Currently here in South Dakota, we are suffering some of the same effects across the nation with our VA health system. And one of the problems we have right now is the fact that the VA hospital in Hot Springs has been put on the chopping block. And when we look at this, we hear a lot of empty rhetoric from my opponents about how they support veterans. We need to remember, and I'd ask the media to go back and recall, that one of the reasons why our VA hospital in Hot Springs is on the chopping block is because during Rounds' administration, Rounds floated the idea of moving the VA hospital. That sent a distinct message to the VA administration that maybe South Dakota doesn't need that VA hospital. So when we have people like that don't understand the needs of our veterans and the requirement and the responsibility that America holds to our veterans to take care of them for their service. That is a distinct message we should be taking as voters to the ballot box. Now, in talking about the major issues of this campaign, we have pushed that across South Dakota, not only in our efforts in talking with South Dakotans, but every Lincoln Day dinner debate that we could possibly talk about, every forum that we could possibly talk about. And let's talk about the debt and the economy. Now, South Dakota Republicans are looking for a candidate that will actually go to DC that's interested in cutting our national spending and cutting our national debt. Now, folks, I'd ask you to take a look at some of the evidence of who is qualified to actually do that here in the state of South Dakota. My opponent, during his tenure as governor, exploded state spending, exploded the size of state government, and deficit spent 7 out of 8 of his budget bills. But he dishonestly campaigns across South Dakota claiming that he balanced the budget. Now, the problem with that is it's dishonest. It's not true. In order to pay for all the deficit red spending, he accepted Obama's stimulus money. And in talking with South Dakotans and South Dakota Republicans specifically across the state of South Dakota, none of those Republicans were in favor of that. They understood that it increased our national debt. Now, Mr. Rounds accepted it's almost up to $1 billion worth of stimulus funding here in South Dakota that went, again, to increase state government and increase state spending in these areas. And that has been added to our national debt. Now, these same people that helped create this problem are claiming that they'll go to DC to cut spending, cut our national debt. And I'd ask them, how are you qualified to say that? Now, I do want to give, kind of commend one of the news media in South Dakota. Recently, the Mitchell Daily Republic called Mike Rounds out for some of his dishonesty on education. Mike Rounds was claiming that he wants to go to DC and cut the Department of Education. And Daily Republic pointed out, wait a minute, as governor, you happily sucked up to the federal Department of Education and made South Dakota extremely dependent on the Department of Education. And more importantly, for South Dakota parents that are struggling with Common Core, Mike Rounds enacted Common Core in South Dakota, was instrumental in helping enact that across the United States. And as Republicans know, Republicans are adamantly opposed to Common Core because what Common Core does is it puts a death grip on our local education decisions by the Department of Education. And as Mitchell Daily Republic pointed out, Mike Rounds has no credibility and a lack of credibility in this area. So when he claims that he wants to cut the Department of Education, it's a conflict of his statements. He says he strongly supports Common Core. Well, Common Core is controlled by the Department of Education, Obama. So we've got to actually have candidates that, instead of taking the snake oil salesman routine, where they look at South Dakotans and they tell them everything they want to hear without any substance, we actually have to have principled public servants that are willing to talk to South Dakotans, say the difficult things that need to be discussed, and take an honest path in those efforts to fix the problems here in the United States. Now, Obamacare. It is a central issue in this campaign. And the frustrating part of this is because Mike Rounds has ran from these debates, these issues have not been vetted. Mike Rounds spent, I believe, $500,000 on an ad campaign, and one of those things was he was telling South Dakotans how he lost sleep and how he opposed Obamacare. Well, folks, again, there's no credibility there. Mike Rounds was met with President Obama on pre-planning conferences to enact Obamacare. Mike Rounds applied for and received millions of dollars worth of grants, Obamacare grants, to enact it here in the state of South Dakota. He also, while he was governor, during the 2010 legislative cycle, there was a bill that was brought up, I believe it was Senate Bill 137, that sought to protect South Dakotans from Obamacare. Mike Rounds personally had his chief of staff go and lobby against that bill in the South Dakota Senate committee hearing. He then, after it passed the committee hearing, went on and he had his chief of staff lobby South Dakota Republican senators to vote against measures that opposed Obamacare. In my first year in office in 2011, the Rounds administration pre-filed Senate Bill 38 and 43 that enacted Obamacare provisions into our insurance laws. Now, as soon as Mike Rounds was out of office, he was on a task force with Tom Daschle. Now, if folks watch the South Dakota Public Broadcasting debate, Mike Rounds said that that wasn't true. That's a lie. And I challenge anyone to go and do a Google search. Rapid City Journal, Mike Rounds, Tom Daschle, Task Force, and you'll see that the Rapid City Journal printed it out back in 2011. Folks, we don't need more dishonest politicians in DC. We need honest public servants who will go to DC and serve South Dakotans and serve this great country. Now, one of the things that is, as a result of Rounds being able to run from these debates and hide, we have an ongoing federal investigation into the corruption in the Rounds administration in the handling of the EB-5 immigrant visa program. And we need to understand, this is an ongoing investigation into the loss of tens of millions of dollars of Communist Chinese investment money and the loss of South Dakota taxpayer dollars in these failed crony capitalism programs. This is hanging over the head of Mike Rounds as we move through this primary process. And this is unresolved, and Mike Rounds has not answered questions as to where those missing tens of millions of dollars are at, claims he doesn't know or didn't have any knowledge of that. Anybody that's paid any attention to the South Dakota legislature or the interactions of the governor's office and the legislature knows that the governor's office is on top of all this. We're talking about a cabinet secretary that mysteriously ended up dead in the middle of an ongoing federal investigation, and this person was a material witness in this investigation. Folks, we need to remember that South Dakota is ranked number 2 in the nation for corruption and the susceptibility for corruption. And when we look at these scenarios here where there's unanswered questions and where this corruption has occurred, is that really what we want to be sending to DC? Is a politician that has involvement in this, that has unanswered questions, that is refusing to answer questions to the people of South Dakota by avoiding debates and discussions in real time in front of the media? Lack of credibility and no credibility on some of these issues. Now, we hear that Ronald Reagan quote keeps coming up where people say, well, if you're with someone 80% of the time and they're against you 20% of the time, they're your friend. Folks, we're talking about the major issues in America. We're talking about Obamacare, we're talking about the economy, we're talking about Common Core, we're talking about veterans issues, we're talking about open government, on and down the line, taxing and spending. On all these issues, myself and Mike Rounds are on opposite ends of the spectrum. We don't have a 20% agreement rate on there. And this man, a year ago, was campaigning, claiming, proudly telling people that he was a pragmatic politician. And he called conservatives professional dissenters. Now, when he's running for office and he's spending millions upon millions of dollars of East Coast special interest monies here in South Dakota to try and buy this election, now he goes on the TV and he claims he's a conservative. You know, Ronald Reagan warned us. Ronald Reagan called the likes of Mike Rounds traitors. And he says it makes no sense whatsoever to turn our party over to these so-called moderates. I agree with President Ronald Reagan. These moderates have been the downfall of the Republican Party. Ronald Reagan said that Republicans should not be flying these pale pastel banners, that we should be flying bold banners on the issues that affect America and let them know distinctly where we stand on them. Now, I've tried to do that in this campaign. We actually bring out our voting records. And the tough part is, folks, when you have candidates that have such poor records and have these scandals, and they're able to run and hide from debates and forums in front of South Dakotans, and instead put out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fluff ads, claiming that they're conservative or claiming that they oppose Obamacare. I have been disappointed in our media. Mike Rounds was called out for his dishonesty on Obamacare, and other than a little bit of pundits talking about it, where has been the fact check here in our media? Another one of my opponents last year claimed that he strongly supported term limits. But he had a record of repeatedly voting to repeal term limits here in South Dakota. What we have to have is we have to have a renewal of our media. I strongly believe in the First Amendment process, but when we have candidates that are able to buy, no disrespect, to buy the media, literally flooding the airways with rhetorical fluff, how is that First Amendment for the people? How is that freedom of the press? Because he's literally able to buy the press. And that's not in the best interest of South Dakotans. Now, my solution to these problems, we're the only campaign since the time I announced our campaign, we put out a distinct roadmap of what we would support and oppose if South Dakotans elected me as their next U.S. Senator. Now, to add to that list, I want to cover a couple things today, and I challenge my opponents. If you take a look at our website pages, I would ask you right now, where does Mike Brown stand on all the major issues? He has done what every typical career politician does. He has not taken a stand on any of these issues. If you look at his website, there is nothing concrete on there that shows where he stands on the major issues. Now, career politicians do that for a reason, so that they can ride both sides of the fence, as Mike Brown has done repeatedly on these issues. He's for Obamacare, he helps enact it, but he's against it for political purposes. He's for getting rid of the Department of Education, but he strongly supports Common Core, which strengthens the Department of Education. You get my drift. Number one, as your next U.S. Senator, I pledge to never vote to raise your taxes. I will always vote to reduce federal taxation and reduce the size of the federal government. Now, this has been played a little bit in the press. Mike Brown refuses to take a pledge that he will not raise your taxes. Folks, Mike Brown holds positions that are exactly the opposite of what South Dakota Republicans believe in. South Dakota Republican Party Platform 5.2 says, we Republicans support the continued review and reduction of federal, state, and local taxation. Mike Brown is in direct opposition to that plan. If Mike Brown wants to run as a Republican and he wants to claim he's a conservative, then how about if he starts actually supporting the South Dakota Republican Party platform, which opposes Common Core, which Mike Brown supports Obama's Common Core. To education. During my first 18 months as a U.S. Senator, I will introduce legislation to phase out the U.S. Department of Education. This will save approximately $7 billion per fiscal year and get rid of about 5,000 education bureaucrats. What this will also do is it will cut the head off the Common Core snake in education. Because without the Department of Education mandating this and pushing this and holding those monies over states like South Dakota's head, what this does is this will re-empower our school boards. It will re-empower our educators, and it will re-empower local control of education at the local level where Republicans believe it is supposed to be. Not with the federal government, where we have seen over the last several decades a continuing decline in our education because of federal involvement in our education process. Obamacare. Mike Brown has said that to vote to repeal Obamacare is symbolic, and he mocked those efforts, which again shows his insincerity at actually dealing with the problem of Obamacare. And I would like to note on a personal note for him, as an insurance businessman, a multimillionaire, we have to understand that the bills that he helped enact, he's made money off of Obamacare here in South Dakota. That's unethical, and it's inappropriate for us to have legislators or governors in that position where they're actually advocating for bills that actually help themselves. And when we see this, we all understand that DC is broken, that the special interest monies are corrupting and ruining our country. And we've got a candidate that has already shown that he's willing to open his pockets and allow DC special interest monies to pour monies into his pocket. And we have to understand, DC is giving Mike Brown all that money, not so that he will go to DC and work for us. They're giving him that money so that he will go to DC and work for special interest groups, just like so many other politicians are already there. I promise to vote to repeal and or defund Obamacare and push for less federal involvement in health care, not more. Talking about what to replace it with is like asking whether we want to replace one fire in our house with another raging fire in our house. It makes no sense whatsoever. We have to get America back to free market principles that made health care affordable. And when I say that, I speak from personal experience. In 1985, I had my first daughter. And I was able to pay for that without health insurance, and it was before I joined the Marine Corps. And I was able to pay that off within several months before I joined the Marine Corps. So there are common sense solutions that we have to get back to that makes healthcare affordable for all Americans. Talking with South Dakotans across the state, they're offended. When they know anything about the EB5 scandal that's ongoing, they're offended that Mike Brown was willing to sell access to South Dakota to Communist Chinese. And folks, Charles Grassley pointed out in his letters to the Department of Homeland Security that their investigation has shown that this is a massive security problem. And as we've seen in the local reports and national reports, there's actually been actions against the Communist Chinese for the sabotage and espionage that they've been causing here in the United States. As your next U.S. Senator, I would vote, within 18 months of being in office, I would move. Said that I have read the South Dakota Republican Party platform, and I pledge to support it. Mike Rounds has had every opportunity, and in a lot of his comments and his positions, he is opposed to what is actually being a South Dakota Republican is all about. Now, the most important part of that is realize in South Dakota in the Republican Party, part of our platform plan 5.17, which I helped enact, requires that our candidates acknowledge they've read the South Dakota Republican Party platform and pledge to support it. Mike Rounds has refused to do that. And my question is, if he refuses to pledge to act as a Republican in the U.S. Senate, why is he running as a Republican to begin with? Because his positions, a lot of his positions, are not as being a Republican. At this time, I'd like to open it up for questions.
I got one, Stace.
Yes, sir.
Maybe two. You mentioned the fact that he's debated you twice, correct?
Yes, sir.
So if he's leading in the polls, he feels by a comfortable distance, and the polls say that, what benefit is it to him to keep debating when he is leading in the polls? I mean, the way he is in his mind, what's the benefit for him to do that?
Well, and that's the exact point, is realize when you're running for office, if you're a career politician like Mike Rounds, then the only thing you're concerned about is how does this benefit me? And his track record has shown that's exactly what he's concerned with. I have pointed out to South Dakotans that I will go any place, anywhere, and discuss the issues that affect them. I even stood right in this room and stood next to Rick Weiland, and Rick Weiland came over to a conservative way of thinking and a view of we have to get this corruption out of our elections. And I have gone to every debate and every forum across South Dakota, and I promise you, as your next U.S. Senator, I will come to every city and town in South Dakota and realize what his example is right now is he believes by his actions, he shows he believes that South Dakotans' interests and concerns are secondary to his own personal aspirations to get into office. And South Dakotans need to understand, if he's running from debates and forums to talk with them about the issues now, how can we imagine or even think that he will show up after he's a U.S. Senator to discuss the major issues of concern to them, especially if it doesn't benefit him? And that's not what we need in a U.S. Senator. We need a U.S. Senator that serves all South Dakotans. And I've shown in my actions in the South Dakota legislature and during this race, I'm not running to be the next Republican U.S. Senator from South Dakota. I'm running to be the next public servant to serve all South Dakotans. I don't care if they're a Democrat, Independent, Constitutionalist, or Republican. And that's what we're supposed to be doing, is running to serve all South Dakotans. And the fact that my opponent has to run and hide from his record is his own actual acknowledgement that his record is that bad that he needs to avoid the public press and also the open access to the people, to their senatorial candidate. And that is unacceptable. If he was an actual conservative, he should be prepared to stand and discuss and support conservative Republican principles, even standing next to a Democrat. And that's what we're expecting him to do. Because if he can't stand right here next to a Democrat and discuss the issues in South Dakota that affect South Dakotans and defend conservative principles, what makes you think he's going to do that when he gets to D.C.? And one of the last points on that is realize Mike Rounds says he opposed Obamacare. Folks, Mike Rounds opposed Obamacare like the Vichy French opposed the Germans. Mike Rounds kissed Obamacare on both sides of the cheek and helped enact it here in the state of South Dakota. If Mike Rounds could not defend South Dakota against Obamacare as a Republican governor with a Republican legislature, what makes you think, or him think, that he can actually go to D.C. and do anything to oppose Obamacare when the Republicans do not control the presidency, they don't control both sides of Congress?
Another question, you
Yes, sir.
mentioned something, maybe not to get the right framing of this. You mentioned that he bought the media, is that what you said?
Well, when I say that, I don't mean that he bribed the media.
No,
what
no,
I'm saying is,
what I'm saying, I don't mean to cut you
Sure.
off. He has a right to take out advertising just like you or any other candidate does. And if he says, I do this and I do this and I do this, you know what, and we're not sitting back. If we have questions for him, tough questions for him and stuff like that, we're not afraid to do it. But he has every right to go and buy advertising the way he feels fit to put up his stand.
right, and that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, when we allow Mike Rounds to sell himself to, he bragged $9 million of special interest money that he was going to get for this campaign, and realize we're talking, I believe 65 to 70% of all his donations to date have been from outside the state of South Dakota, from a lot of PACs from the East Coast. And what we're doing is, he's able to do at this point is, he overwhelms our media in South Dakota with light fluff rhetorical ads, claiming he lost sleep over Obamacare. And when he's doing that, he can basically flood the markets with dishonest campaign ads that are not the truth. And in that aspect, it subverts the freedom of the press, because he's able at that point to basically buy all the press he wants to circumvent the free press media.
Stace, what do you spend the next few days doing?
Well, if you notice this nice tan, unlike Mr. Boehner, this was actually work gotten from going door to door across South Dakota. My old broken down knees are sore. I'm icing them every night. We're going door to door. I'm looking South Dakotans in the eye. And I can tell you, if we were able to hit every South Dakotan and talk with them eye to eye and talk with them and point out to the differences in the candidates, we win by a landslide. We're seeing growing support, surging support across the state of South Dakota. I mean, folks, you're talking about a shoestring grassroots conservative Republican running against a $9 million East Coast special interest funded political machine moderate. And if you go out drive across South Dakota, there's those beautiful bold red, white, and blue banners across the state, and it shows you actual grassroots support, not bought grassroots support. And what we're going to do is we're going to continue down that path. You know, as I told folks when I first got into this race, I didn't want to run. I don't want to go to DC, but I am a public servant. Folks asked me to run, and I'm going to break my heart till June 3rd, doing everything possible to provide South Dakotans the choice of an honest public servant versus a bought and paid for career politician that is dishonest to them.
Stace, two questions.
Yes,
One
sir.
substantive, one more about the race itself. You started your news conference talking about the Veterans Administration and the big mess. You have a unique perspective as someone who's actually used the facilities and have friends that have used it. What would you do if elected to try to fix the VA?
Number one, accountability. Secretary Shinseki is immediately responsible for the failures in the VA administration. On top of that is President Obama. Obviously, the U.S. Senate has little ability to hold President Obama accountable for the shortcomings, but they do have the ability to hold Secretary Shinseki responsible, and as well as his administration and the folks that are responsible. The amount of bonuses that these VA officials received in these failing hospitals that have failed America's veterans is unacceptable. It is not the American tradition or fashion to reward failure. And that would be the first thing that we would have to do as U.S. Senator, is push to hold these folks responsible for these shortcomings. Because if we don't hold these administrators responsible for failing to take care of our veterans, the problem persists, and all they do is kick the can down the road. Our country deserves more than empty rhetoric and empty outrage. And as I've told people on the campaign trail, as a disabled veteran, as an active duty veteran, I can tell you this: before I would allow our veterans to be sacrificed as sacrificial lambs, they'd have to drag my dead, rotten corpse up the U.S. Senate floor before I allow them to mess with our U.S. service members or our veterans.
Then my other question is, at a recent news conference this week, Dr. Bosworth said she was planning to buy television time, have her own forum. She said one of the candidates was confirmed. Are you that candidate?
Well, I told you folks, at any climb and place, I'll go there for debate on conservative issues. I have confirmed with Annette Bosworth that I will show up. That's this afternoon. And you know, it's my responsibility as a candidate to the people of South Dakota to look in the eye and tell them where I stand on the issues and answer their questions. And I'm an old Marine. You know, if Rick Wyland calls me out and says, am I going to stand on these conservative principles, I'm going to be there. If Annette Bosworth calls me out and says, hey, are you going to stand on these conservative principles, I'm going to be there, and I'm going to stand there and I'm going to support and defend conservative principles, conservative Republican principles, because that's what the voters expect, is that they expect to have a candidate that is open and willing to talk to them and discuss some major issues, not only during the campaign, but after they're elected. And we've seen way too much of that even in South Dakota with some of our candidates dodging debates because it's not convenient or it doesn't benefit them. I can promise you this: as your next U.S. Senator, if and when I run for re-election, I promise you this: I would debate any opponent in every town, every state, or excuse me, every town, every county in South Dakota if they so desire and people so desire. Because that's your responsibility when you're a public servant and when you're in a public official.
Stace, you might have buried the lead. Are you taping something with Dr. Bosworth this afternoon?
It's my understanding, yes, there is a debate forum this
What,
afternoon.
when, where?
I can get you that afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
I got it on my phone. Yes, sir.
Would you offer some specifics on when you said that, Rounds owns an insurance company, and my understanding is a property and casualty insurance company, and how does that, when you said he profited from Obamacare, can you explain how that worked?
It's my understanding that Rounds Insurance Agency was one of the first agencies that signed up to be a navigator underneath Obamacare. And I believe they're handsomely paid for their services. That's my understanding. Yes, sir.
Stace, I believe the pre-primary reports are in the process of being filed, and I know they have to go to the Senate first, so they are a little pokey on being posted to the FEC website. Can you tell us how much you've raised for the what you're reporting for the pre-primary report?
I'll have to ask Eldon for the specifics, but with that, I want to point out, it has been this push by the Rounds campaign that the candidate that is most able to sell himself out and get donations is the best candidate. And to my Republican colleagues and the Republican voters that I want their votes on, I'd ask them to remember that President Obama had the best run campaign 2 presidential elections and was one of the best people in raising money. Just because someone's willing to sell themselves out to special interests, don't make them a great candidate. But we can get up with you afterwards. I can find out from Eldon what the specifics are. I think it was pretty consistent with what we've been raising so far, and 98% of that is from South Dakotans, blue-collar South Dakotans, and the 2% that isn't from blue-collar South Dakotans are from conservative, independent conservatives across the nation.
Well, and just to follow up to that, because obviously the amount you raise translates to the amount you're able to advertise. I noticed that you're advertising on the television at this point. What can you tell us about your ad buy going into the weekend before the election?
Yeah, our major ad buy has been for the last week of the election. It's supplementing our ground campaign with campaign signs. We have personally put on doors and handed to people about 70,000 of our pamphlets. And our pamphlets are trifold. They've got the most information about the candidacy of any of the U.S. Senate candidates. And we got a great ground campaign going. So our ads are only supplementing the old-fashioned campaign that we're doing so far.
Can you tell us the amount that you've spent for this weekend's ads?
I want to say it's everything combined. I would say it's around $20,000. And
Is that TV and print, or is that just?
TV, print, and radio ads. So, and I'd like to point out, folks, Ford did a great job of advertising the Pinto. We spent a lot of money on the Pinto advertising. Just because they advertised it as a great product, it didn't make it a great product just because there's a lot of TV ads out there.
Going back to a couple things I want more specifics on. You said that Rounds was to blame for opening the door to the Hot Springs VA transfer. More specifics on that. And then secondly, you talked a little bit about what you think the federal investigation is of the EB-5 program, and frankly, I've been writing about that for a long time. I don't know what the federal, so I'm curious how you know what the federal government is investigating.
Well, we've seen I'll answer the last one first. We've seen plenty of indications what the federal investigation was about as some of the leaks as far as the records requests that they had. I mean, it isn't about North Dakota's involvement in the EB-5 program. I mean, it is obviously about South Dakota's involvement and the loss of monies as a result of what they're looking for and talking about. And the real disconcerting thing is there's boxes upon boxes of records that were taken that are state property that are missing. And I mean, as a retired federal agent, when I look at this and we see all the smoke that is there, and the fire for that matter of fact, Northern Beef Packing Plant is failed. The Vedlin Dairy failed. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars that are missing out of the Northern Beef Packing Plant from the Communist Chinese. Rapid City Journal did a great article about it and pointed out those folks spent a lot of money and they didn't get their visas and they don't have their money and they don't have the investment. And And a lot of people says, well, it's only Communist Chinese. Well, yeah, it's only Communist Chinese, but it's South Dakota's reputation. And the question we have to ask is, where are those missing millions of dollars? And Mike Brown's claimed it was a great success, Jonathan. And when he said that at the South Dakota Newspaper Association, I almost lost my teeth, because the definition of this failed thing is by far not a great success. When you have a dead sector of economic development, former sector of economic development, dead under mysterious circumstances in the middle of an ongoing federal investigation into this corruption, that's not a great success. And when you talk about tens of millions of dollars of lost money, millions of dollars of South Dakota taxpayer dollars lost money, that's not a great success in anybody's book. And what was your other question?
I wanted more specifics on the VA Hot Springs. You said that he opened the door to having that.
Yeah, if you check some of the media archives, if you remember, Mike Brown's offered up, asked, polled around South Dakota about moving the VA hospital. And that, I truly believe.
Mike Brown's polled?
Mike Brown's administration offered up to move the VA administration. I believe they offered to move it to Rapid City. Bottom line is, they sent a distinct message to the VA administration that the VA hospital wasn't needed in Hot Springs as a result of that offer and those efforts. And I truly believe that was probably the impetus for the VA to look at closing Hot Springs Hospital. Well, is there any other questions? Well, folks, I do thank you for coming out. I'm sorry that this wasn't an interview at numerous debates across South Dakota, but as it is, you know, in this race and knowing that there's major differences between the candidates that has not been vetted, that has not been put out there, we felt it was prudent to put out where we stand on these issues and show that there is major differences between myself and Mike Brown's. And that I am a conservative Republican. I support the South Dakota Republican Party and our Republican Party platform, and Mike Brown's doesn't. And that's simply a great observation from the fact that he refuses to tell South Dakotans that he will commit to pledge to support our Republican Party platform. And he's had every opportunity at numerous forums, public forums, to do so. So, bottom line is, I'm a Republican. I want to have a Republican nominee that actually supports what Republicans believe in. Thank you very much for your time, folks.